Recommendation 21, we're just getting to the last of them now. Quite rightly, and thankfully the Minister pointed out that we'd missed off a couple of rules out of one of our areas for the flood ponding rules. Now, the flood ponding areas are the natural ponding areas that people are most familiar with, probably Henderson's Basin, the Lower Styx, Cranford Basin. As part of stage 1, we mapped that area, but we didn't have rules. And as part of stage 3, we've got rules that, for the most part, are very similar to the floor level and fill management areas, except in regard to subdivision and new buildings. And those rules were, in our reviewing, got dropped off. So we've got fairly restrictive rules in that area because we don't want new subdivision, filling of those areas and new buildings right in the middle of what's a natural ponding area.
Go.
Yep.
On that note, and I've found the information, Brigitte, that I put the note down for you, so that's cool. Pauline and I are both sort of going to talk on this, I guess, today. What you've just said about putting residential on natural ponding areas, my understanding is that there's a significant part of the Cranford Basin that's been identified as being wholly appropriate for build, not only in a geotechnical sense, but in a services sense. Ultra-fast broadband is there, there's public service access, it's 15 minutes walk to Northlands and so forth. So my question is, how do you rationalise what I've just suggested with what you said previously?
We will come to Cranford Basin. It is a specific topic, but the areas around Cranford Basin that have been highlighted potentially for urban development are on the higher lying areas around the edge of the basin. They're not actually in the basin.
Right.
Much of the land that has been put forward in the notice of requirement for stormwater, of course, that is the areas, those are the areas that Fiona's really referring to.
Oh, she said Cranford Basin.
So I use that generic
natural basin,
Right.
where the water ponds.
The development is really the rim of the basin.
Is this clear? I mean, a clear distinction?
Yes,
it is.
This is a ponding area,
Yes.
and it is already extant. But we have what the ministers have highlighted is that we haven't provided the rules in the appropriate place in the chapter, so we're adding them in.
And if I use the term like in a broad sense, Henderson's Basin, but you need to actually look at the planning maps and see which part of Henderson's Basin is actually mapped as vulnerable to flood ponding.
Yeah, same with Cranford.
Because of some of the issues around this, and of course some of the submissions that we've had, can we be clear in differentiating between areas? Because when I hear Cranford Basin, as do a number of people, probably including the submitters, it suggests the whole area, including the area that is higher, that has been identified as potentially...
No, this is just the ponding area, and this is just the flood ponding management areas, because they were allowed to keep the FMA title, unlike the other ones, which I've had to learn a whole new set of words for. Floor level and fill management areas.
So what I'm asking is, and I
These
know
are
what you're
flood
talking
ponding
about,
management
can
areas.
we please qualify that when we use it? I'm sorry to sound pedantic, but...
We are not talking about the residential development potential the area. We will deal with that later in the day.
Call it Cranford Rise.
Yes, we should call it. Yeah, or the... the Cranford Rim.
Okay, so just moving on now to recommendation 23.
Yep.
And here it's, again, dealing with the policy that we've just referred to that refers to those ponding areas. Potentially, to address the councillor's concern there, instead of saying including the Henderson's Basin, etc., we say including parts of. But I mean, the thing is that the whole area is a natural ponding area, and we've got a variety of sort of management regimes over that area, and we're not identifying all of that area as ponding. So, I probably prefer to just keep it, because this is a policy, keep it at this high level, but be clear in our explanations into the future that it is just part of that area that's vulnerable. The main change that we're promoting here is that deletion of the word urban, and that's already been raised in part with the through the hearings panel, but we're just making that clear now that because of the rewording of parts or provision of rules as part of stage 3, that we just want to make it clear that it's not just urban areas, there are some rural areas too, and other areas that we want to be subject to those rules.
Is that the main reason for that change then?
Yeah, just the urban, yeah. Now, the underlying...
Change of urban? That's
Yeah,
the
removing
main
that so it
reason
can
change.
apply more widely, not just to urban areas.
Okay.
And recommendation 23, which is the last one, is really more of a tidying up a little inconsistency here. And I'll need to take responsibility for this. There is some reference in the Section 32 report supporting the Stage 1 chapter to doing a cross-reference in the slope stability table to existing provisions in either zones or district-wide provisions, and this minor change here corrects that and makes it consistent with the Stage 1 indication in the Section 32. Okay, and that concludes the amendments proposed.
I have with me Janice Carter, who can respond to the question about what was the sea level rise level that was mentioned in the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and in the Regional Policy Statement, if you'd like to hear an answer to that question. Come up here.
Neither of those documents actually provide levels, particularly the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, which I have here, doesn't recommend any particular sea level rise in it, rather that it's a consideration and that it should be taken into account, and that a measure or an allowance should be made for sea level rise, but it doesn't actually state what that allowance should be. And likewise, the Regional Policy Statement discusses various scenarios for sea level rise, but it doesn't actually recommend a particular sea level rise number.
Sorry, I'm sorry to be interrupting, but I've just been taking advice because the Cranford Basin issue is a very live issue later in the day, and there is a certain requirement to be signed off by central government if we are able to notify what we want to do in the Cranford Basin. So, and we're working very collaboratively with ECAN to make that happen. So, yeah, okay. Sorry, I just thought I'd interrupt, and so I apologise for taking my eyes off the ball, but I did see a phone call from a very important person, which I thought if I got Kate to address that, then we could make some movement this afternoon. I'm hoping we can. Yep, Phil.
Just going back to what you said, Jenna, so does that mean that in fact the levels that we refer to, 50 centimetres, 100 centimetres, does that mean that that's like based on regional science rather than a national?
No. I understand that Tonkin and Taylor have based those on the IPCC recommendations, which I think heard from Mark Iverme before. So that's the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, has scenarios. So that the adoption of the 1 metre sea level rise was a recommendation in a previous Tonkin and Taylor report, which has been adopted for Stage 1 and has been carried on through in this report to give various scenarios. I think Leona, you might have
so
more.
They're based on sort of international figures, and New Zealand has yet to re-adopt them as a nation.
So that's actually referred to in the Tonkin and Taylor report that's being released today.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. So is that the end of the recommendations on natural hazards, or have we still got recommendation 23?
That's it.
Sorry, the figure I heard today was 400 mils rather than 500 for 50.
Yeah, that's 50 years.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's what's, again, that's analysed in the Tonkin and Taylor report. So
That difference, or
yeah, and that's based
okay.
on his analysis of the international information and relating it to New Zealand's situation.
Thank you.
All right. So have we done recommendation 23?
Yes.
You did. Right. Sorry, I apologise.
Okay.
So that's the end of
Natural hazards.
natural hazards.
I do wish to draw your attention to the high-level recommendation